Hello and welcome to the History of Bangalore. I am Ramjee Chandran with Season 2. And it's great to be back after my hiatus following Season 1. Some of my smart pals with shows like mine use their break to kick back in some nice corner of Europe. Me, I tripled my workload by adding writing a book to my to-do list. All right, now that I've sainted myself, back to business. But before I plunge in, first, as always, a word of thanks to the Prestige Group. This podcast is made possible because of their sponsorship. Building cities one landmark at a time, they transform dreams into reality. You can be a part of the future. Simply add prestige to your life. Right, let's get the show on the road. Today, I start with Season 2 of the podcast, and I will cover the years between 1399 and 1799. The starting point, 1399, is when we can start to trace the beginnings of the Mysore royals, the Wadiyars, as well as the origins of the Kempe Gowda family in their migration from Kanchi to the greater Yelahanka region. Now, in this journey of 400 years between 1399 and 1799 is the all-important historical marker of 1537, when Kempe Gowda I is said to have set up the Pete, thereby laying the foundation for the modern city of Bengaluru. And the end point of this season is 1799, and that's when the British forces, accompanied by the Nizam of Hyderabad and the Maharaja of Travancore, stormed the fort at Srirangapatna and killed Tipu Sultan. By doing this, they came to control the kingdom of Mysore, over which they retained control in one form or another until 1947, when India became independent. Those 150 years or so of British occupation will happen in Season 3, but right now I need to start with Season 2. And I start this season by recounting the legend, and it's only a legend, mind you, of how Kempe Gowda's family arrived in Bangalore. Now, those of you who have listened to the very first episode of this podcast might find the story familiar, but over the last year, this podcast has acquired tens of thousands of new subscribers who may not have heard it. So sit back and enjoy yourselves, and let me get started with Season 2. There's an interesting story that I read in the 1927 edition of the Mysore Gazetteer that I would like to share with you. And this is the story that begins in the twilight of the 13th century. In a small hamlet called Alur, which is near the even then important center of Kanchipuram, it's about 270 kilometers from Bangalore, there lived 7 families. Simple people of the soil, known as Rayats, a local word for farmers. Life for them was as pastoral as one could imagine, within the bounds of a typical South Indian Hindu society, with its expected mix of castes and creeds and landlords and workers, chieftains and their agents. The place where they lived and worked, the village of Alur, lay in a tract of land called Morusanadu, named for their clan, the Morusavakkulu, a name that is still prevalent in the district and other districts. Bilingual, they spoke both Telugu and Kannada, and of course Tamil, considering generations of them had lived and worked in Alur. The tribe worshipped as their deity the god Bhairadeva, and the leader of the clan was Rana Baire Gowda, named after the deity. Now, Baire Gowda had a daughter, Doddamma, a maiden of such captivating beauty that it is said that the stories of her beauty flowed like a soothing breeze through the paddy fields. People whispered of her luxuriant hair, her knotted tresses so long that she often used them as reins to lead the calves that she was tending to. But the pastoral and peaceful life the families of the clan had led, presumably for generations, was shattered one day when the local chieftain, or the Palegar, also a word that means local rich guy with a lot of clout, declared that he had fallen in love with Doddamma. And then he set about proposing marriage to the girl's family. But powerful though he was, there was a problem. The Palegar was not an acceptable groom for the Gowda families, who, staunch in their traditions, rebuffed all attempts to forge such an alliance. The Palegar persisted, smitten by the beauty of Doddamma, and clearly very possessive. He sent his agents around frequently and in fervent pursuit, to the Gowda household with gifts upon gifts for what he considered his bride to be. Without any sign of any reasonable solution, the situation between them became increasingly tense, and the Gowdas resisted all attempts of the Palegar's agents to make this alliance happen. They turned down every approach and every offer the Palegar's emissaries made, and they did so politely and without dismissing the Palegar outright to his face. Such diplomacy was necessary. While Baire Gowda and his clansmen were unwilling to enter into what they considered a mess alliance for Doddamma, they also realized the need to handle this situation with some finesse, as they did not want to invite evil repercussions to befall the families at the hands of this Palegar. Sometimes the more intelligent move and the greater bravery is to consider the good of the people around you, whose lives and livelihoods are at stake, rather than engage in violence, no matter how justifiable it might be. The clan met and decided that their futures lay elsewhere, and came to the decision that they would leave Alur forever. Meanwhile, the Palegar was receiving none of the clan signals. He was having none of that. He could only hear what he could hear in his head. So he went ahead as though a wedding had already been fixed, and as if Doddamma was already his betrothed. All preparations were made as if for marriage, and the wedding day was even fixed, and worse, a marriage pavilion erected. While all this was going on, the Gowdas had already taken steps to leave Alur. They had quietly packed all their valuables and had made themselves ready to leave that district during the night. Considering that the farming community wake up early, the clan would have had to have left Alur no later than nightfall. So one night, they packed what they could take, and among the things they loaded onto the bullock cart was an idol of their god Bairadeva. And then, claiming that such was their tradition and custom, they put all the presents sent by the Palegar and with a dog, tied it to the milk post of the pavilion, and deserted their ancestral homes, their livelihood, their entire past, and started to walk westwards. To the west of Kanchipuram is the Palar River. The Palar originates in Nandi Hills in the Chikballapur district of what is today Karnataka state, and flowing through Karnataka, Andhra and through Tamil Nadu, it finally reaches its confluence with the Bay of Bengal in the small town of Alur, about 75 kilometers south of Chennai. Unlike the other rivers in the region, the Palar is independent of the Kaveri and flows directly into the Bay of Bengal. The 7 Gowda families in Alur, some say they were brothers, decided to make their way upstream. It is not clear if they knew their destination or they were simply following the course of the river to its source. Their journey would have been largely on foot and on bullock carts, and what we do know is that they followed the path of the Palar until they could cross it, perhaps at a ford. Now, fords are shallow parts of the river where they could cross even with bullock carts. But as the story goes, they faced a danger as the Palegar, probably realizing what had happened, had given chase to the group and was advancing upon them. The Gowda clan was in a tough spot. Danger was following them from the furious Palegar, and in front of them the river raged. There was no time to look for a convenient ford. It was either get across the river right there or stay and face mortal danger from the Palegar and his thugs. According to folklore, it is said that when the Palegar's men were close, Doddamma took off her earring, threw it into the Palar River with an incantation to the goddess Devi Amma. Suddenly, the swollen and turgid river ebbed and parted, creating a navigable ford and allowed the Gowda group to pass safely across. And as soon as they did, the river closed up again and raged forth, blocking the advance of the Palegar, who returned home empty-handed. We will not know what circumstances led the thuggish Palegar to his conviction that Doddamma was rightfully his bride, but the story of the river crossing, which is similar to the exodus of the Israelites, was attributed to Doddamma's ability to appeal to the gods on account of her chastity. And the clan was safe and proceeded towards their new life. And now for a word from our sponsors, and I will be back in 30 seconds to continue with the Gowdas on their journey, right after this.
Maximum connectivity, maximum luxury, maximum lifestyle. Live your max at Prestige Raintree Park. Opulent residences nestled in 21 acres of breathtaking landscape with 1 lakh plus square feet of clubhouse, 3 swimming pools and ample leisure and sports amenities. Experience exquisite living at Prestige Raintree Park in prime Whitefield with schools, offices, hospitals and shopping malls just a hop away. Call 81399 or visit prestigeconstructions.com to know more. RERA approved.
Hello, I'm back, and to continue with the story. From the description of the turgidity of the Palar River, it is likely that this move from Kanchi would have been between the months of June and September, being the months of heavy rain, probably more September than June, considering that Kanchi is significantly downstream from its source in Nandi Hills near Bengaluru. While it originates in Nandi Hills, the Palar is an underground river for the first 90 kilometers of its run, emerging in the vicinity of the town of Bethamangala. It is likely that the route of the Gowdas had included several old towns in their path, including settlements, and then reaching the town of Bethamangala, where the Palar surfaces. There's a dam on the Palar in Bethamangala called the Bethamangala Palar Dam, and it has created a huge lake in the area that provides water for irrigation to the nearby agricultural fields, but importantly provides water to the nearby township, notably Kolar Goldfields. This dam was created centuries before the odyssey of the Morosuvakulu from Kanchi. Inscriptions dating back to the 10th and the 12th century speak of the dam being breached and being rebuilt, once in the year 950 and another time in the year 1155. There were other occasions in the 15th century as well, described on inscriptions. The journey of Rana Baire Gowda and the clan would have been over a distance of about 250 kilometers and would have taken several days. Tracing their route was surprisingly uncomplicated on a map, and the existence of several small state and rural roads on the route point to old pathways that would have existed for travelers of that era. But however well-trodden their path, their journey was fraught not only with having to avoid needless confrontation with the Paligar and face the dangers of a raging river, but also the uncertainty of their futures, having left everything behind, their ancestral homes and their lives. Having come to what was new lands, to a totally new life, they needed to find their ground for themselves. First, the clan reached the bustling town of Kolar, where they briefly settled before moving to Avati at the base of the Ramaswamy Betta, which is an imposing hill to the east of Nandi Durga or Nandi Hills, and that's about 50 kilometers from Kolar. When they reached Avati, there was something of a novelty. The descriptions of the clan arriving in Avati was a notable event. Arriving in bullock carts was an uncommon sight in those times, and so they were called the Bandi Kapulu or cart people, maybe indicating their relative affluence when compared to the locals. Rana Baire Gowda and the clan built small houses for themselves and thus lay the foundation for what would become the village of Ahuti, which is now called Avati. However, while they acted as a single unit when they were farmers sharing a common practice and a common life in Alur, losing their ancestral identity placed stress on the bonds of kinship. Even the ordeal that they shared during this perilous journey was not enough to bind them indefinitely. Besides, they must have sensed great opportunities in the lands to which they had come. So before long they made the decision to part, to go their separate ways, each patriarch leading his own branch of the settlement elsewhere. Rana Baire Gowda remained in Avati, looking after its growth, while his son, Malla Baire Gowda, assumed the mantle of leadership and established Devanahalli, Doddbalapur and Chikkbalapura. In later episodes of this season, we will return to Malla Baire Gowda, an ambitious high achiever. The Gowdas found themselves to be natural leaders, and soon each of them established himself as the leader or the Paligar of the region. Before long, the clans had spread significantly across the region and established themselves in various places. Sanna Baire Gowda ventured to Holavanahalli or Korampur, where he laid the groundwork for Korathagere in the Tumakuru district. Timme Gowda charted a course towards Sugattur near Jannamakote, ascending to his prominence as the ruler of Kolar and Punganur, and he carved out the foundations of Hoskote. A descendant of Timme Gowda would go on to establish Anekal, All these places today are practically suburbs of modern Bangalore. Now that accounts for 3 of the clan. The destinies of another 3 remained obscure to history. But most important to our story was the 7th patriarch of the Morosuvakulu, who established himself in Yelahanka, marking the end of their migratory odyssey. And he was Jaya Gowda, the great-grandfather of Kempe Gowda I, the founder of modern Bangalore. The origin story of the Kempe Gowda clan is laced with fanciful accounts, as most origin stories are, but there is evidence that some elements of the story are true. One is that they were Morosuvakulu people, and their family deity was Bhairadeva. And the other is that they migrated to the Nandi Durga region from elsewhere. However, there are historians who reject this whole story. They argue that the community likely lived right there as traditional chieftains long before the Vijayanagara and Hoysala periods. It is said that they are really homegrown people and they were native to the area in and around Yelahanka, and they just grew in stature to become Palegars of the area. The fact is, there is not enough written evidence for their origin story, and very often in such cases, popular legend mixes in with facts, and what we must do is remain satisfied with whatever evidence can be verified. But some aspects of the story do play out. For example, the earliest evidence that there was someone called Bhaira, which in the context is clearly a reference to Bhaire Gowda and not the family deity, is on an inscription recording a grant that was found in Yelahanka, and this inscription dates back to 1342 AD. It sort of lines up with the dates correctly. It mentions the Hoysala king Veeraballala as the overlord and refers to a Bhaira Deva, which must be Bhaire Gowda, as the great Yelahanka Nada Prabhu. Incidentally, this was 1 year before Veeraballala was killed near Madurai and the Vijayanagara kings took over the Hoysala kingdom. And then we find another inscription a few years later from 1359 AD. This refers to Bukka of Vijayanagara as the overlord and mentions Bhaira Deva as the Yelahanka Nada Prabhu and one of the benefactors of the grant. That record, which was made in June to July, in the month of Ashada, in 1359, reads, Bukkanna Odayar was ruling the kingdom of the world. The Mahasamantadipati Linganayaka, the Yelahanka Nada Prabhu, Bhaire Deva, and others made some grant. It is anyone's guess who Linganayaka was. It might be a name, it might be a description. I have heard different theories about all this. In the Mysore Gazetteer, Benjamin Lewis Rice writes that Jaya Gowda started his rule as Yelahanka Nada Prabhu in 1418, and that was 68 years after this grant. So when you line up the math, we know that the early Gowda clan began to rule the area somewhere in the middle of the 14th century, and that by then they were exercising considerable clout, making grants, for example. The Gowdas had witnessed the rather bloody end of Veeraballala III at the hands of the Madurai Sultanate, and they would have had to switch allegiance from the Hoysalas to the Vijayanagara kingdom. And now that they were settled and had come to stay as the new rulers of Yelahanka, they would remain for many generations as the Nada Prabhus of the different regions of present-day Bengaluru for centuries to come. In the next episode, I talk about Kempe Gowda's ancestors, starting with Rana Bhaire Gowda, right through to Gidde Gowda in 1513, paving the way for the emergence of Kempe Gowda I. The history is now in the city of Bengaluru. I am Ramjee Chandran, and this is the History of Bangalore.